Teenager takes the stand describing how he and his friend his great-grandmother.
Scare her to get money and then use force if needed.
Innocence lost and darkness found. Shocking but true, some kids have committed heinous crimes that earned them life sentences.
God! God!
These cold-blooded juveniles, once thought to be pure by nature, gave in to their evil desires and left us trembling with fear.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground now!
As they faced the music in court, their true colors shone through. Some wailed and cried, while others put up a pretentious act that only made matters worse. Kids are paying the price for their crimes. Don't believe us? Here are the top 20 most infamous juvenile offenders whose reactions to their life sentences will send chills down your spine. It's a cautionary tale of how innocence can turn to evil in the blink of an eye. Number 20. Roxanna Sikorski. Roxanna Sikorski made headlines in 2016 when she was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison for plotting to assassinate her family members. The then 17-year-old from Michigan had hatched a plan with her boyfriend to take the life of her grandfather, aunt, and younger brother. According to reports, the motive behind the gruesome plot was financial gain, as Sikorski was set to inherit a large sum of money from her grandfather's estate.
She was a good student, good girl, good friends.
Sikorski's behavior had worsened after meeting her boyfriend on Facebook, and she became determined to take her family's lives because they filed a statutory assault complaint against him. Following his instructions, she attacked her younger brother and attempted to do the same to her sister before fleeing the house. She was later found at her boyfriend's home, where she was arrested. At her sentencing, Sikorski tearfully apologized to her family for her actions and was visibly remorseful.
I would like to apologize to my family.
However, the judge still sentenced her to up to 20 years in prison for her crimes.
She does not become a threat to either herself or other persons in the future.
Number 19. Lionel Tate. Lionel Tate was a 14-year-old boy who received a life sentence for assaulting 6-year-old Tiffany Eunick in 1999. Tate's mother was babysitting Eunick and left the two children alone to take a nap. Tate claimed that he was only playing and accidentally injured Eunick while demonstrating wrestling moves. However, Eunick's injuries included a lacerated liver, skull fracture, and brain swelling, which the prosecution argued were consistent with an assault rather than an accident. Tate was tried as an adult and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge stated that Tate's actions were not that of a playful child.
In the investigation of the death of Tiffany Eunick,
Tate's lawyers also argued for a lesser sentence, but it wasn't granted. During his sentencing, Tate remained mostly expressionless and silent. But in 2004, a state appeals court overturned his conviction due to his mental competency not being evaluated properly. He was eventually released on 1 year's house arrest and 10 years of probation. The next one on this list is considered among some of the most detested criminals in the world. You guessed it right, on number 18 we have the notorious school shooter T.J. Lane. Number 18, T.J. Lane. T.J. Lane was a 17-year-old former student at Chardon High School in Ohio, USA, when on February 27, 2012, he took the lives of 3 students and injured 3 others. Lane had personal problems with one of his victims, and witnesses stated that he used to ride the same bus as the victims to school. Lane used a .22 caliber handgun in the attack. 2 of the wounded students were hospitalized, and one of them sustained injuries that left him permanently paralyzed. Lane was indicted on 6 counts, but due to his age, he was detained as a juvenile while the authorities decided whether to try him as an adult or a child. Lane was ultimately charged as an adult and pled guilty to all charges, receiving 3 life sentences without parole. During his trial, Lane showed a lack of remorse and even wore a T-shirt with a not-so-decent word on it. He also made hurtful comments towards the families of his victims, causing further distress to them. Lane's actions were met with shock and sadness by the community and the wider public. Number 17. Nikolas Cruz. Nikolas Cruz is the criminal responsible for carrying a firearm into Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and taking the lives of 17 people on February 14, 2018. He pleaded guilty to all charges and was formally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The families of the victims were disappointed by Cruz not receiving the death penalty, but Broward Circuit Judge Elizabeth Shearer imposed the statutorily mandated sentence.
It is a life sentence with a mandatory life sentence under Florida's 1020 life.
Cruz was ordered to serve a life sentence with no possibility of parole for each of the 17 counts to which he pleaded guilty. Cruz will also not be able to financially benefit from the crimes he committed in any way, and the judge garnished his commissary funds until all costs and restitution were paid. During the sentencing, Cruz remained emotionless and was wearing a red prison jumpsuit and eyeglasses. He was also wearing a medical mask, but it was taken off when a victim's mother pointed out it was disrespectful for him to be hiding his expressions while the families of his victims spoke. Number 16, Antonio Barbeau. Antonio Barbeau, along with his friend Nathan Pape, was convicted of taking the life of his great-grandmother Barbara Olson with a hatchet and a hammer in 2012. Barbeau was just 14 years old at the time of the crime. The motive for the crime was to steal money from Olson's home. The community was shocked by the brutality of the crime, especially given that it was committed against Barbeau's great-grandmother. In 2013, Barbeau was sentenced to 36 years in prison for first-degree intentional homicide. At the time of his sentencing, Barbeau was emotional and unable to finish reading his statement. His attorney read the statement on his behalf as he was overcome with tears. The severity of his punishment had dawned on him. Judge Timothy Van Ackeren stated that the sentence was a minimum punishment for what Barbeau had done, and that he had never seen such a horrendous crime in his 24-year career as a judge. Number 15. Joshua Earl, Patrick. Joshua Earl. Patrick Phillips is an American criminal who, at the age of 14, took the life of his 8-year-old neighbor, Maddie Clifton, in November 1998. Phillips was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for his heinous crime. During his trial, Phillips revealed that he had Maddie to keep her from crying after she was accidentally struck by a baseball while they were playing.
I did something horrible. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened.
He feared punishment from his abusive father, so he dragged Maddie inside his home and with a baseball bat before hiding her body under his bed. His mother discovered Maddie's body in his room, leading to his arrest. Phillips was tried as an adult, and his trial was moved from Duval County to Polk County over concerns about the publicity in Jacksonville. Phillips has shown little remorse for his crime over the years. In 2012, he was interviewed by a local news station, during which he refused to apologize for what he did, saying, "I don't feel the need to apologize for something I didn't do." He also claimed that he was innocent, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. In 2019, Phillips unsuccessfully appealed his life sentence, arguing that the Supreme Court's ruling that mandatory life sentences without parole for juveniles were unconstitutional should be applied retroactively to his case. Number 14. Stuart Harling. Stuart Harling was a reclusive teenager who spent most of his time immersed in violent video games. He harbored fantasies of becoming a famous and eventually acted upon them by taking the life of 32-year-old Cheryl Moss. Harling later told psychiatrists that he was inspired by a documentary on the crimes of Richard Ramirez and felt nothing while assaulting Moss. He was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison by Judge Brian Barker, who remarked that Harling had demonstrated a callous disregard for the value of human life. Harling was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison by Judge Brian Barker, who commented that Harling had demonstrated that his horrifying actions meant very little to him. During his trial, Harling showed no emotion or remorse for his actions, and his defense team argued that he was suffering from a mental illness at the time of the crime. However, the jury ultimately rejected this defense and declared him guilty. Number 13 on our list made headlines in social media both for his horrific crime and his looks. You guessed it right. Next, we have Cameron Herrin. Number 13. Cameron Herrin. Cameron Herrin was the 18-year-old driver of a Ford Mustang involved in a street racing incident that took the life of a mother and her baby on Bayshore Boulevard in 2018. Herrin was sentenced to 24 years in prison for his role in the crash. According to reports, Herrin and another man, John Barroneau, were racing at the time of the collision. Barroneau also pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. State Attorney Andrew Warren said that no sentence can repair the damage caused by the tragedy or bring back the lives lost, but he hoped that the outcome would provide some comfort and closure for the victims' families. At the sentencing hearing, the court adjudicated Herrin guilty on count 1 and sentenced him to 9 years in Florida State Prison. He was sentenced to 15 years in Florida State Prison for count 2, to be served consecutively, for a total of 24 years in prison. The bailiffs were directed to take Herrin into custody. He was shocked while hearing his sentence, and his wide-eyed reaction went viral on social media.
Sentence him to 15 years Florida State Prison, and that'll run consecutive to count 1.
Number 12. Caleb Sharp. Caleb Sharp, the perpetrator of the Freeman High School in 2017, has been sentenced to 40 years to life in prison after pleading guilty to premeditated assassination and attempted assassination. The shooting resulted in the death of 1 student and the injury of 3 others. With credit for nearly 5 years served, Sharp will be in prison for at least 35 years, making him eligible for parole at age 55. During his sentencing hearing, Sharp delivered a speech to the community and victims, which was followed by the judge's decision to release a surveillance video of the moments leading up to the shooting to the public. State prosecutors presented the video to the court, showing multiple perspectives from the day of the shooting. Prior to his sentencing, Sharp apologized to his victims and the mother of Sam Strahan, the boy who died in the shooting, and asked for their forgiveness.
I'm sorry to Amy and Emily for taking Sam from them.
However, he did not react or display any emotion when the sentence was announced. Number 11. Samantha Grigg. Samantha Grigg, an 18-year-old from Saline, Michigan, will never graduate from high school as she had expected to. Instead, she was sentenced to 6 to 15 years in prison by Judge Randy Tavonen for her involvement in the death of Dustin Frolka, a 19-year-old Michigan State University student. Grigg pleaded guilty to manslaughter and unarmed robbery charges before the court. While apologizing through tears for her role in Frolka's death, Grigg claimed she had no intention of causing him harm, but admitted to driving 2 people to commit a robbery.
To extend my deepest remorse to the family of the victim.
Colleen Hinka, the half-sister of Dustin Frolka, expressed her disgust towards Samantha Grigg during the trial, describing her as someone lacking morals and conscience. Letters calling for both leniency and life imprisonment for Grigg were read out in court. Frolka's family claimed that Grigg showed no remorse for her actions, and her social media presence following Frolka's death was cited as evidence of this. Number 10. Danta Wright. A disturbing incident occurred in a courtroom in Washtenaw County when a teenager who had confessed to taking the life of 18-year-old Jordan Clee from Ann Arbor was seen grinning and almost chuckling while the victim's family members gave emotional impact statements.
I've lost laughter and love.
One family member read out loud, "I have lost my only child, my son, my baby, my friend. Moreover, I have lost laughter and love. I no longer have the hope of having grandchildren." The defendant, 17-year-old Danta Wright, then addressed the court with an inappropriate and disrespectful attitude, stating that he would soon be going home and expressing his love for his family.
I'll be home soon, R.I.P. Keon, I love my family.
This behavior did not sit well with the judge, who considered rejecting the sentencing agreement and taking the case to trial.
Smile and laugh and shake your head like this was no big deal.
However, after a brief recess, the victim's family reportedly requested that the case not go to trial, and the defendant was ultimately sentenced to 50 years in prison. During a break in the court proceedings, Wright's lawyer apologized for his behavior and stated that he suffered from emotional issues that caused him to smile inappropriately.
And some people display fear by smiling.
Number 9. Damon Kemp.
God!
Damon Kemp is a criminal who was accused of a double shooting that occurred in Daytona Beach in 2018. According to reports, Kemp took the life of his friend and wounded another person during an altercation. He reportedly told the police, "I took the life of my friend," and later admitted to the shooting. Kemp was charged with first-degree and attempted first-degree. In August 2021, he was found guilty of second-degree and attempted second-degree. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison for this and 30 years for the attempted assassination charge, to be served concurrently. Ingram's family members stated that he was allowing Kemp to live in his apartment for free.
He used to say that he wanted to be a police officer, and you know that's dangerous.
Detectives claim that neighbors failed to call the police despite hearing gunshots. Kemp was initially arrested on a burglary charge unrelated to the assassination. During his court appearance, Kemp was brought in a wheelchair and screamed the word God repeatedly at the top of his lungs.
God! God!
Cameras inside the courtroom captured him baring his teeth, bulging his eyes, sticking out his bottom lip, and talking over the judge. Despite the outburst, the judge found probable cause for Kemp's arrest and denied him bond. Number 8. The Bever brothers. The Bever brothers, Robert and Michael, were responsible for a mass assassination that took place in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma in 2015. Robert was 18 years old at the time, and Michael was 16.
This is a tragedy of immeasurable dimensions.
On July 22, 2015, the brothers stabbed and bludgeoned to death their parents, David and April Bever, as well as 3 of their younger siblings, Daniel, Christopher, and Victoria. The brothers had planned the attack for months and had stockpiled weapons and ammunition in preparation.
Sent body armor, knives, and he was in the middle of buying guns and ammunition. I see.
In 2016, Robert and Michael Bever were found guilty of 5 counts of first degree and 1 count of assault and battery with intent to assassinate. Robert received 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, while Michael, who was tried as a juvenile, received a sentence of 35 years to life in prison. During the trial, the brothers showed no remorse for their actions and were described as emotionless and cold by the prosecutor. When Michael's sentence was read, he initially smiled and then wiped his eyes, but the brothers remained largely emotionless throughout the proceedings. It was revealed during the trial that Robert had aspirations of becoming a famous criminal.
You can't explain that. Man.
Number 7. Amin Walker. Amin Walker, an 18-year-old man, was sentenced in 2019 for the armed robbery of a Cleveland priest. In August 2018, Walker and 2 other men held up the priest at gunpoint outside of his church and stole his wallet and phone. Walker pleaded guilty to the charges of aggravated robbery and kidnapping and was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. During the sentencing hearing, the victim, a Catholic priest, delivered an emotional statement, saying that he forgave Walker, but that he needed to face the consequences of his actions. Walker apologized to the priest and his family for his actions,
Also, always like a negative to a positive. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
saying that he was sorry for causing them fear and pain. However, the judge in the case was critical of Walker's behavior and told him that he needed to take responsibility for his actions and change his life while in prison. Number 6. Fernando Salgado. Fernando Salgado, an 18-year-old student at A.B. Miller High School in California, was arraigned on assault charges and pleaded not guilty to 2 charges relating to separate classroom incidents. Salgado broke down in tears and yelled out to his family and friends for help when ordered to remain in jail until July 9th, as his bail was set at $300,000. Salgado was wearing a green jumpsuit, indicating that he was in protective custody. Salgado's appearance in court followed that of his teacher, Emmanuel de la Rosa, who was also charged with inappropriately assaulting 2 students. 3 other male students were arrested and charged, but their names and charges were not released because they still were minors. It's time for today's subscribers pick. This picture of a child in court recently went viral and elicited all sorts of reactions from netizens. Many think the boy, who seems to be a toddler, shouldn't be in court facing a trial and punishment, while others have speculated that the child has been sentenced and his reaction speaks volumes about the severity of his sentence. But what crime did he commit? Tell us what you think in the comments below using the hashtag #subscribespick. Number 5. Alex and Derek King. Alex and Derek King were 2 brothers from Florida who were convicted for taking the life of their father, Terry King, in 2001. At the time of the crime, Alex was 12 years old and Derek was 13 years old. The brothers reportedly took the life of Terry King with a baseball bat while he was sleeping on a couch in their home. The case gained national attention due to the ages of the perpetrators and the brutality of the crime. However, due to their young age and the controversy surrounding the case, the brothers were eventually granted a plea deal. Alex pled guilty to second degree and was sentenced to 7 years in prison, while Derek pled guilty to third degree and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. During the trial, the brothers testified calmly and without emotion, with their heads down.
To be fair to those people, we did make a mistake.
Derek was sentenced to 8 years in prison, and Alex received a 7-year sentence. Alex was released after serving 6 years when he turned 18 in 2002, while Derek was released in March 2009 at the age of 20. Number 4, Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero, both 18, were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the brutal assassination of Halseth's father, Daniel Halseth. The couple had planned the crime for weeks, eventually stabbing the victim multiple times and his body. Halseth and Guerrero were both raised in Las Vegas and had been dating for several months before the incident. Guerrero was known to have a troubled past, including a history of drug abuse and previous run-ins with the law. Halseth, on the other hand, was a straight-A student and had no prior criminal record. The couple was charged with assassination, conspiracy to commit homicide, and robbery with the use of a deadly weapon. They both pleaded guilty to the charges and were sentenced in June 2021.
The sentence that was agreed upon by the parties. Ms. Halseth, in accordance with the laws of the state of Nevada, you're going to be adjudicated guilty on count 1, conspiracy to commit murder.
Halseth and Guerrero were sitting stoically as the judge handed down their sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. No visible reaction was seen from either of them as the sentence was announced. Their faces were expressionless, and there was no sign of remorse in their eyes. Number 3, Nehemiah Griego. Nehemiah Griego, the son of a New Mexico pastor, committed a horrific rampage in which he shot and took the life of his parents and 3 younger siblings. He reloaded his assault rifles and planned to continue the shooting spree at a local Walmart, but instead went to his family's church where he reported the facts to his pastor.
First of all, he's young and cognitively, and to me, he's a child. And then secondly, there's some mental impairment.
He confessed to the authorities and was later found to have been seriously malnourished and abused by his parents. Despite this, his crimes were heinous, including point-blank attacks on his younger siblings. In 2016, Griego was sentenced to 30 years in prison after pleading guilty to 2 counts of second degree and 3 counts of abuse resulting in death. He was charged as an adult for the crimes, despite his age at the time of the homicide. During the sentencing hearing, Griego read a statement expressing his remorse and asking for forgiveness from his family members' loved ones. He stated that he was truly sorry for his actions and that he wished he could take it all back. Number 2, Conrad Shafer. Conrad Shafer was a teenager charged with 2 counts of first degree for taking the life of David Guerrero and Eric Roopnarine, as well as several other charges related to shootings in Kissimmee and St. Cloud in 2013. Shafer pleaded guilty to the 2 counts of first degree, and the other charges against him were dropped. He was sentenced to life in prison for the assassination of Roopnarine and between 40 years and life in prison for taking the life of Guerrero. Shafer was 15 when he committed the homicide, and at the time of his guilty plea, he was 18 years old. During the hearing, Shafer did not speak much, mostly answering the judge's questions with yes or no.
Do you have any questions about the possible penalties you're facing in these cases? No, Your Honor.
His father, who had purchased the gun used in the shootings, pleaded no contest to a gun charge and was given 4 months in jail and 2 years of probation. Shafer apologized to the families of his victims during the sentencing, acknowledging the wrongness of his actions and expressing his regret. Despite this, he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Number 1, Alyssa Bustamante. Alyssa Bustamante is a convicted criminal who was responsible for the death of 9-year-old Elizabeth Olten in 2009. Bustamante was 15 years old at the time of the crime and lived in St. Martins, Missouri. On October 21, 2009, Bustamante strangled Olten and assaulted her with a knife several times. Bustamante later confessed to police and was subsequently charged with first degree. In 2012, Bustamante pleaded guilty to second-degree and armed criminal action. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole and is not eligible for parole until she serves a minimum of 35 years in prison.
In the same position as to punishment as an adulthood, even though she'd been certified as
During her sentencing hearing, Bustamante expressed remorse for her actions, saying, "I just want to say I'm sorry for what happened. I'm sorry for the Olton family. I'm sorry for my family. I'm sorry for everybody I hurt in the process." To the justice system, it doesn't matter whether you're 10 years old or 70. If you do the crime, you're going to do the time.
Life without parole, if there was another option, then there would have been no reason to have accepted that offer.
It is, however, a bit heart-wrenching to realize that some of these child convicts will never see the world outside of a prison ever again.